The war had been going on for 3 years. 3 years of retreat. Commander Veth stood at the viewport of the eternal tide and watched another planet burn. The third moon of Caritha IV. It had 17 million people on it a week ago. Now it had smoke and silence and Krath ships moving through the debris like teeth through bone. 3 years, 7 worlds, 460 billion dead. Veth turned from the viewport. He could not watch anymore. The war room was full of his officers. Their faces said what their mouths would not. They were losing. They had always been losing. The Krath did not negotiate. The Krath did not retreat. The Krath were a hive mind that had been consuming galaxies for 2,000 years, and the Vahari coalition had been in their path for 3 of those years, and now there were fewer Vahari than there had been and fewer still every day. "The Bryneth fleet is gone," said Sub-Commander Rowe. She kept her voice flat. Flat was how you survived news like this. Admiral Toll's last communication came 6 hours ago. They held the line at Bryneth Station for 11 days. 11 days. Against the Krath, 11 days was a miracle. It was not enough. Veth sat down. His chair was made from wood from a planet that no longer existed. He noticed this sometimes. Sat in a chair built from a dead world, looked at screens showing more dying worlds and tried to think of something new to do. There was nothing new. They had tried everything. Mass assault, surgical strikes, guerrilla tactics borrowed from species who had fought the Krath before and lost a little more slowly. The Krath adapted to everything. The hive mind processed every tactic used against it and adjusted within days, sometimes within hours. "What about the outreach signals?" Veth said. Rowe checked her pad. 42 species received the broadcast. 39 have not responded, 2 declined. She paused. 1 accepted. Which one? The humans. Silence in the war room. The Vahari knew about humans. Everyone in this part of the galaxy knew about humans. A small species. 1 homeworld, 1 moon colony, a handful of outposts on the edge of explored space. They had only achieved faster-than-light travel 60 years ago. By any reasonable measure, they were a very young species, very new, very small. "How many ships?" Veth asked. 12. 12. The Karath had come at Bryneth Station with 400. 12, Veth said again, quieter. "Yes, Commander. And they think 12 ships will help?" "They didn't say that." Rowe held out the pad. They sent a message. Veth read it. The message was short. It said, "We're coming. Don't engage the Karath until we arrive. We need to watch them first." That was all. No promises. No speech about alliance and honor and shared survival. No assurances that everything would be all right. Just, "We're coming and wait, and we need to watch them first." Veth handed the pad back. He did not know what to make of it. "How long until they arrive?" he said. 4 days. Tell the fleet to hold the Cassian line. No offensive action. He looked, back at the viewport. The smoke from the third moon was spreading thin and gray against the stars. He thought 4 days. We can hold 4 days. He was not sure he believed it. The humans arrived in 4 days, exactly as promised. Veth watched them through the relay feeds. 12 ships. They were smaller than he had expected, darker. They did not have the clean, elegant lines of Vahari warships or the massive bulk of the old Bryneth destroyers. They looked functional, blunt, like something built not to be, admired but to do a specific job for a very long time. The lead ship broadcast on the Coalition frequency. "This is Anzac Carrier Adamant, General Mira Kane commanding. Request permission to dock a shuttle." "Permission granted," Veth said. The shuttle was also dark, also blunt. It docked without ceremony. General Mira Kane walked off it 12 minutes later, and Veth's first thought was, she is very small. She was shorter than most of her own crew. She had gray-streaked hair cut close to her skull and dark, steady eyes that moved across the docking bay the way a scanner moves across terrain. Not looking for beauty, looking for information. Every surface, every exit, every face catalogued and filed and stored somewhere behind those eyes for later use. She crossed the bay and shook Veth's hand. Humans did that. He had read about it. The grip said, "I am here. I am real. I am not leaving." "Commander Veth," she said. "General Kane, welcome to the Eternal Tide." "Thank you." She looked around the bay one more time. "Where can I see your battle records?" Not, "It's good to meet you." Not, "We're sorry for your losses." Not, "We're here to help." "Where can I see your battle records?" "We've prepared a briefing," Veth said. "Good." A small nod. "How long have you been fighting the craft?" 3 years. Something moved in her eyes. Very briefly. There and gone. 3 years, without a break in the advance? None. Have they ever used the same formation twice? The question was unexpected. Veth looked at Ro. Ro checked her records. There are similarities between formations at times, but no exact repetition that we have found. Kane nodded slowly, almost to herself. They adapt. Yes, how fast? Days, sometimes hours after a failed engagement. She made a short sound. Not distress, not surprise. The sound a person makes when something they suspected turns out to be true. "Take me to the briefing," she said. The briefing lasted 6 hours. Kane did not speak for the first 4. She had brought 2 of her people with her. A Talm named Sergeant Harlan, who had the kind of face that had been broken and healed and broken again so many times that the scars had become part of the structure of it, steady and unremarkable. And a young woman named Lieutenant Senna, who spent the entire briefing taking notes on a physical pad with a physical pen. The Vihari officers found this baffling. Physical notes. Paper. As if she did not trust anything that could be wiped clean. Veth watched the humans watch his data, the battle maps, the casualty numbers, the tactical failures recorded in precise detail because the dead deserved at least that. The planets lost listed with their populations. The one time the coalition had held a position, Outpost 7 at the Drell Belt, and what had happened to it anyway, 8 months after the celebration. Kane watched all of it without expression, calm, focused. There was something in her stillness that was not peace. It was controlled, like a current held behind a dam that she had built a long time ago and maintained through habit. At the start of the 5th hour, she said, "What is your biggest tactical problem?" One answer. Veth thought, "We cannot predict their movements. Every time we set a defensive line, they find a way through it or around it. Because they adapt to, your defenses." "Yes. So stop being defensive," Kane said. The room was quiet. "We've attempted offensive operations," Rose said. "Careful, not challenging, just careful. The results have been not that kind of offensive." Kane stood up. She walked to the battle map and tapped a point deep behind craft lines, a relay station, coded in red on the display. What is this?" "A craft communications hub. We identified it 8 months ago and attempted a direct strike." "What happened?" "We lost 40 ships. The craft responded within 3 minutes with a force 3 times larger than our strike team. They had anticipated. They didn't anticipate it." Kane said, "They felt it coming. 40 ships make a lot of noise." She stepped back. "What is the smallest force that could reach that station?" Veth did not follow the question. "We would need, at minimum, to commit enough firepower to overcome the station's defensive. Smallest, strip everything away if you sent the least possible. 3 or 4 ships, perhaps, but the defensive grid would destroy them before." "What if it wasn't ships?" Kane said. The room was very quiet now. "What are you suggesting?" Veth asked. Kane looked at Sergeant Harlan. Harlan looked at her. Something passed between them that had no words attached to it. An old understanding, the kind built from shared experience that no one else had been part of. "I am suggesting," Kane said slowly, that you have been fighting this war the way you know how to fight, and the craft have been responding the way they know how to respond. And that is why you are losing. You are giving them exactly what they expect. She looked at the map. You need to stop giving them things they know how to process, and humans know how to do this. Rose said. There was something in her voice. Not quite doubt, something more tired than doubt. Kane looked at her steadily. We've had a long time to practice being unpredictable, she said. We were very good at it before we had spaceships. She said it without pride, without threat, as if it were simply a fact of their history, like their star's color or the gravity of their homeworld, something they had been born into and learned to use. Ro did not answer. That night, Veth sat alone in the command room and thought about the humans. He had read about them, of course. Everyone had. Read about them. A young species, 60 years in space, one homeworld, a recorded history that their own scholars described with words like catastrophic and relentless and cyclical. Wars that lasted centuries, wars fought over strips of land smaller than most space stations, wars fought over ideas that could not be touched or measured, wars fought over almost nothing sometimes, driven by something inside the human animal that could not be easily named. They had nearly destroyed themselves twice. Once with weapons that split atoms and salted the earth for generations. Once with something slower, a collapse of systems they had built and depended on and pushed past the point of recovery. 30 years of that. 2 billion dead. Billions more displaced. Their whole civilization cracked open like a hull breach, and they had come out of it. They had come out of it and built ships and reached the stars. And here they were, 12 blunt, dark vessels at the edge of a war that was not theirs, sent by a species that had spent most of its own history killing itself with spectacular creativity. Veth was a student of other people's histories. He had studied many species. He had never found another that had come that close to self-extinction and kept going anyway. He thought he understood something about that now. A little. The survivors had not been the strongest. The survivors had been the ones who adapted, who found something new when everything familiar had been destroyed, who had, and this was the part he kept returning to, an almost structural refusal to accept that defeat was the end of the story. The craft adapted to what they observed. The humans adapted to everything, including things no one had ever seen before. He thought about Kane's question. Smallest force, not most firepower. Least, quietest, most invisible. He thought about the wood in his chair, the planet it had come from, the people who had lived there, who were ash now, who existed only in records and the memories of anyone who had known them. He thought about the 17 million on the third moon of Cartha 4. He thought about what another 3 years of this would look like. He picked up the comm. General Kane, he said, I would like to continue our conversation. Her answer came back in under a minute. I was hoping you'd say that, she said. They talked until the station cycled into night shift lighting, into the dim blue the Vihari used to signal sleep hours. Kane did not seem to need sleep, or she needed it and treated it as optional. Veth could not tell which. She talked about the craft the way an engineer talks about a failing structure, hunting the stress points, the places where the load was uneven, the joints that might give way if you knew exactly where to push. She had spent 3 days reading every record Veth had on the craft, every battle log, every field report, every failed strategy filed by officers who were mostly dead now, and she had built a picture of them that was different from the one Veth had built across 3 years of losing. They think as a mass, she said. Every craft is connected to the whole, which makes them fast. Collective processing, collective response. But it also means they cannot separate, Veth said. They cannot individuate, Kane corrected. They have no concept of one unit making a choice the rest don't immediately know about. One soldier moving without the hive knowing. One action taken in genuine secrecy. She tapped the table once. They have no concept of a secret. Veth was quiet. He sat with that for a long moment. We're going to use that. Kane said. How? She told him. When she finished, the command room was very still. Sergeant Harlan, who had stood by the door for 6 hours without sitting or complaining or asking for water, let out a slow breath. Not fear, not quite. Something older than fear. The look of a man picking up a weight he had carried before and knew the shape of well enough to hate it. It will work, Kane said. If your people trust us and follow our lead. They will follow, Veth said. He meant it. He was looking at her and he was thinking about the chair beneath him built from the wood of a dead world, and he was thinking, we have nothing left to lose. Nothing except the worlds that are left. He was also thinking for the first time in 3 years something that was not despair. He could not name it yet. It was too new, too small and careful to name. When do we begin? He said. 6 days, Kane said. We run reconnaissance. First, Sergeant Harlan needs to get close to that relay station, needs to see it with his own eyes. Veth looked at Harlan. Ghost, he said. You said you would explain the nickname. Harlan looked back at him. That flat, broken, re-healed face. A small smile on it. Patient and without warmth. I'll show you instead, Harlan said. He said it like a promise, like the kind of promise that had been kept before in dark places where no one was watching. Veth nodded. Outside the viewport, the stars burned on. The craft fleet was out there somewhere moving, adapting, consuming, waiting for the next defensive line to push through. They had never had to wait for something they couldn't see coming. In 4 more days, they still would not know what was coming, but they would learn. Sergeant Dav Harlan had been called Ghost for 11 years. He had been called Ghost since a night in the Ural Mountains, when a 6-man squad had walked into a compound controlled by 40 armed men and walked out again with 3 hostages, and the 40 armed men had not known anything had happened until they found their cameras looping on empty footage and their communications cut at the root, and their 3 prisoners simply gone like they had never been there. Like a ghost had taken them. That was the story. That was the start of the name. But the name had kept going, because the name kept being true year after year, operation after operation. Harlan moved through defended spaces the way water moved through rock. Not by force, but by finding the places where force was not needed. By being patient. By being small and quiet and invisible in the way that only a very dangerous person could be invisible. Because danger does not always announce itself, and the most dangerous things in any environment are often the ones you cannot see. Now he floated 300 minnows from a Krath relay station in a suit that cost more than some of the planets the Krath had destroyed. And he watched. He watched for 2 full days. He ate rations from a tube without tasting them. He slept in 4-hour cycles with one eye checking the passive sensors every time he surfaced. He recorded everything the suit systems could record, and he recorded the things the suit couldn't, the things that could only be seen and understood by a human brain with 11 years of doing exactly this. The patterns, the rhythms, the way the Krath patrol drones moved in arcs that were perfectly calculated and therefore perfectly predictable, the 12-minute gap in the eastern sensor array when 2 patrol routes overlapped and their signals bled into each other. The way the station itself pulsed light, not randomly but in a sequence, communicating status back to the hive in regular bursts. The fact that the station was never, not once in 48 hours, completely dark, because the hive was always listening, because the hive needed to know always that the station was there. Harlan noted everything. He noted it in the particular way he had trained himself to think, not in terms of threat, but in terms of seam. Every defended thing had seams, places where 2 systems met and did not quite fit together perfectly, places where the design assumed a certain kind of attack and left a gap for the kind of attack it had not imagined. The craft had not imagined him. On the 2nd day he found the seam. He pressed the transmit key twice. 2 short pulses code for "I have what we need." Coming back. He turned in the dark and began the long drift home. 12 minutes, he said to Kane. They were in the briefing room of the Adamant, maps on every surface, coffee going cold in a cup that no one had touched. It was late, or what counted for late when you were in deep space and time was mostly a choice. The eastern sensors go blind for 12 minutes when the patrol routes cross. That's the window. Kane studied the map. 12 minutes for insertion and placement. Yes, then we wait for their next communication burst to the hive. How often? Every 4 hours exactly. The station pulses its status. When it does, the hive will get an unexpected signal. Instead. Harlan paused. If we do this right, the hive won't know what it received until it's too late to matter. Lieutenant Sena was doing calculations on her physical pad. Placement team of how many? 2, Harlan said. More than 2, and we show up on the passive sensors even in the blind window. 2 people, Beth said. He was sitting at the end of the table. He had been very quiet since the briefing began, listening. Beth was, Harlan had decided, a good listener, which was rarer than it should have been. 2 people, Harlan confirmed, to destroy a station that repelled 40 of our warships. Harlan looked at him. We're not going to destroy it, he said. Then what? We're going to change it, Kane said. She stood up. Commander, the Cathar hive mind communicates through this station. They trust the station because the station has always told them the truth. Every 4 hours, here is our crow. Position, here is our strength, here is what we see. She put her hand on the map. We are going to make the station lie. Beth was very still. You can do this? He said. Sena can, Kane said and looked at her lieutenant. Sena looked up from her pad. She was young. Young enough that Veth had initially assumed she was some kind of aide. She had a small, serious face, and the kind of stillness that had nothing to do with calm and everything to do with focus. I've been studying their signal architecture since we arrived, Sena said. Their communication language is complex, but it's rigid. No variation, no improvisation. She set down her pen. They don't lie to each other. They have no mechanism for it. So they also have no mechanism to detect it. The room was quiet. We inject a false status signal into the 4-hour burst, she continued. The station tells the hive that a certain sector is clear, that a certain coalition defensive position is weak and undermanned, that the gap at the Cassian line is an opportunity. You're going to make the hive walk into a trap, Veth said slowly. We're going to make the hive lead itself into a trap, Kane said. That's different. We don't force them. We make them believe they chose it. Veth looked at her for a long moment. There is a saying in Bahari culture, he said. The best trap is the one the prey builds for itself. Kane's expression did not change much, but something in it shifted. We have the same saying, she said, more or less. Harlan and Sena went out 4 days later in a 2-person insertion craft that was less a ship and more an absence of a ship, a hull designed specifically to swallow radar, light, and heat, to present as background noise in the electromagnetic spectrum, to be nothing. They crossed 300 kilometers of monitored space in 4 hours and 10 minutes. They entered the 12-minute window with 40 seconds to spare. Harlan moved first. He had done this enough times that his body did it without full instructions from his brain, muscle memory taking over. Each motion precise and minimal, nothing wasted. He neutralized the 2 exterior access sensors with a tool the size of a thumb. No explosion, no visible damage. They would read as functional when the patrol passed. Sena moved into the station access port behind him. Inside the station was automated. No craft present, they didn't need to be. The hive didn't station bodies where machines would do. This was the seam, the thing the craft hive mind had never needed to think about. An unmanned post was also an undefended one in the ways that mattered most. Sena worked in silence. Her hands were perfectly steady. She'd been doing this kind of work since she was 22. Not infiltration, but the quieter version of it, the versions that happened in code and signal, and the hidden language that machines used to talk to each other. She had cracked 3 different classified communication architectures before she was 30. The crafts was harder than 2 of them and easier than 1. 8 minutes. She found the signal layer. She found the authentication key the station used to confirm its identity to the hive. She did not break it. She copied it. Then she built a shadow transmitter, a secondary device no larger than a playing card, wired into the station's power supply, invisible behind a panel that had not been opened since the station was built. And she gave it the key, and she gave it a very specific set of false status reports, and she gave it a timer. 11 minutes 40 seconds after they entered, they were back outside. The station looked exactly as it had. It pulsed light into the dark, communicating to the hive, telling the hive everything was normal, everything was as it should be. It would tell the hive the same thing in 4 hours when the burst transmitted. It would lie. Back on the Eternal Tide, the Coalition officers watched the data Senna laid out for them, and they were quiet in the way that people are quiet when they are trying to understand something that should not be possible. The false signal will transmit in. Senna checked her pad. 6 hours. The hive will receive a report that the Cassian line's northern flank is at 30% capacity, that the Vehari fleet has pulled back to the Drell approach. Both of which are false, Beth said. Both of which are false, Senna confirmed. When the crafts receive this, they will compute it against their other intelligence, and they will see an opportunity. They will reroute their advanced force into the Cassian line's northern flank, said Rowe. Into the Cassian line's northern flank, Kane said, which will be fully staffed and which will have our ships in support. It's an ambush, said one of the other Bahari officers, a broad-shouldered man named Commander Fell, who had been skeptical since the humans arrived. Yes, Kane said. Fell was quiet for a moment. We have tried ambushes before, he said finally. Not like this. Every ambush you've tried, the craft had some intelligence that warned them. They have sensors everywhere, eyes everywhere, they process everything. Kane looked at him evenly. But they can't process a signal they trust. They can't adapt to information they believe is true. That's the point. Fell was still not convinced. Veth could see it on his face, the weight of 3 years pressing on every new idea. 3 years of ideas that had all eventually failed. And if it doesn't work, Fell said. Kane looked at him. Then we try something else, she said. We have a list. There was a moment of silence. A list, Fell repeated. A long one, Harlan said from the door. He had changed out of his insertion gear and was drinking something from a dark metal cup. He said it without any particular feeling attached. Just yes, a list. We have been doing this a long time, and the list is long. Fell looked at Harlan, looked at Kane, looked at Veth. Veth nodded once. Fell sat back in his chair. The plan moved forward. 6 hours later, the false signal transmitted. The hive received it, processed it, combined it with 3 weeks of careful intelligence that the humans had also, very quietly, very patiently, been feeding it through 2 other compromised relay points that no one in the Coalition had known were compromised until Senna found them and turned them. The craft saw an opportunity, a gap, a moment of Coalition weakness at the northern Cassian flank. The craft did not hesitate. Hesitation was not in their nature. The hive saw an opening, and the hive moved to fill it because that was what the hive did, had always done, had done for 2,000 years. It moved into gaps with overwhelming force and closed them and expanded and moved into the next gap. They moved 312 ships to the northern Cassian approach, into the waiting guns of the Coalition fleet. The battle lasted 4 hours. The craft lost 89 ships. They had not lost that many in a single engagement in the entire 3-year war. They had never been surprised before. They had processed every enemy signal, every troop movement, every tactical decision, and they had always known. They had not known. They folded back from the Cassian line for the first time in 14 months. In the war room of the Eternal Tide, officers who had not celebrated a victory in 3 years were very loud. Rowe was gripping Veth's arm. Commander Fell had both hands on the back of his chair, leaning into it, and his face was doing something it had not done in a long time. Veth looked at Kane. Kane was watching the tactical readout. She was not celebrating. Her expression was the same as it always was, focused, steady, contained. But there was something new in it, something small and hard and bright. They'll adapt, she said quietly. They'll know the relay was compromised. They'll audit their other stations. How long? Veth asked. A week, maybe 2. She looked at him. We won't use that method again. But we don't need to. Because you have a list, Veth said. Because we have a list, she said. Outside, the stars burned. The craft fleet was out there in the dark, folding back, processing a loss it had not believed was possible, searching for the source of the lie, looking for what had changed. They were looking in the right direction. They just didn't know yet what they were looking at. The craft did what the craft always did after a loss. They came back bigger. 11 days after the ambush at the Cassian line, the Hive sent 470 ships toward the Vahari's most critical resupply point. A station called Reach 7, sitting at the junction of 3 coalition supply lines. If Reach 7 fell, the whole front would begin to starve within weeks. No fuel, no ammunition, no replacement parts for damaged ships. The coalition's fighting strength would drop by half in a month and by 3/4 by 2 months. And after that, there would be nothing left to fight with. The craft knew this. The Hive had been building toward Reach 7 for months, and the Cassian loss had not changed the plan. It had accelerated it. The Hive had processed the ambush and reached a conclusion. The coalition was still trying something new. The answer to something new is to end the game before the new things could matter. 470 ships. The coalition had 93 available to defend Reach 7. Veth looked at the numbers on his screen, and for a moment the 3 years of losses pressed down on him like physical weight. Then he looked at the 12 human ships, and thought about what Kane had said in their very first conversation. Stop being defensive, he called her. I know, Kane said before he could speak. She was already at the tactical display. We've been tracking their fleet movement for 6 days. You knew they were coming here? I suspected. Reach 7 is the logical target. They can't respond to one surprise, so they're going for the thing that removes the need for future surprises. She pulled up the formation data. Look at this. 470 ships, but look at how they're arranged. Veth looked. He had looked at craft formations for 3 years. He knew them better than he wanted to. It's standard overwhelming force approach, he said. They expect to push straight through any defense. Yes, straight through. Forward momentum, mass at the front, overwhelming the center. Kane tapped the outer edges of the formation on the display. The flanks are light. The rear is almost nothing because they've never needed a rear guard. No one has ever gotten behind the craft advance. Because getting behind the craft advance means going through it, Veth said. Or around it. She looked at him. Or underneath it if the terrain is right. The terrain of space was not terrain in any traditional sense. But the gravitational geography, the Didens fields, the debris clusters, the places where normal engines strained and sensor arrays got confused by background interference, that was terrain. And Kane had spent 11 days mapping it. She showed him. The plan was, by Vahari standards, almost too simple to be taken seriously. The coalition's 93 ships would form a defensive line directly in the craft's path. Loud. Obvious. Exactly what the craft expected. Exactly what they had been beating through for 3 years. The craft would come at them hard. The humans would be somewhere else entirely. We'll move through the Venn debris field, Kane said. It will shred our sensor arrays if we're not careful, but it will also block their sensors, completely. We go through it. We come out behind them. And then you hit their rear while they're focused on our front, Beth said. While they're certain they're about to win, Kane said. The moment an enemy is certain they're winning is the moment they're least prepared for something to go wrong. Beth thought about this. They will adapt. They will turn to face you. Some of them will. And when they turn, your people hit the center while it's undefended. She straightened. We hold them in 2 directions at once. The Hive is fast at processing one problem. 2 simultaneous problems from opposite directions. Can it process both? We don't know. She paused. But we know it's never had to try before. There were other officers who had opinions about the plan. Commander Fell was chief among them. We're committing our remaining operational fleet to a defensive line that is supposed to look weak, he said in the meeting that followed. We need them to believe we're failing, so we show them a defensive line and we let them hit it and we absorb the damage while we wait for the humans to come around from behind. He looked at Kane. How long for your ships to traverse the Venn debris field? Best estimate, 3 hours. 3 hours in which the craft are hitting us with 470 ships. Yes. Fell was quiet for a moment. His hands were flat on the table. His voice was very controlled. We have 93 ships. Yes, against 470. Yes, for 3 hours. Fell looked at Veth. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Veth looked at Kane. Is this possible? Can 93 ships hold against 470 for 3 hours? Kane's expression did not change. That depends on how they hold. If you try to match them force for force, no. You'll lose in 40 minutes. Then how? You don't fight them on their terms. You fight the way people fight when they're outnumbered and they know it and they still refuse to leave. She paused. You make every engagement cost them more than it should. You don't defend a line. You defend a concept. You make retreating impossible by making it pointless. Every meter they take has to be paid for so heavily that their advance slows to nothing. A war of attrition, Rose said. A war of expense, Kane said. You make the assault too expensive to complete quickly. Buy us time. That's all we need. Fell looked at his hands. He looked at Veth. He looked at the tactical display. The Brenneth fleet held for 11 days, he said quietly. And we are asking for 3 hours, Veth said. Fell closed his eyes for a moment. 3 hours, he said. He opened them. Get your ships through that debris field, General. The Karath came 12 hours later, as predicted. They came en masse in the standard overwhelming formation that had broken every coalition defense for 3 years, with 470 ships arranged in a forward wedge so dense it showed on sensors like a solid wall of hostile intent. The 93 coalition ships formed their line. They looked from the outside exactly like what they were. Not enough. Ships trying to hold too much space. The Karath would see this, and the Karath would see through them within 40 minutes by their own pattern of prior engagements. The Karath came in fast, and the coalition did not try to match them. The outer wings of the coalition line split apart and fell back and split apart again like water around a thrown stone, and the craft swept through the gaps and into the trap inside the gaps, because the ships that had moved weren't retreating. They were repositioning. And each repositioned ship was exactly where it needed to be, to hit the craft advance from a new angle the moment it moved past. It was not elegant. It was not the kind of battle that would be remembered for its beauty. It was grinding and loud, and the coalition took damage, heavy damage because 93 ships could not take 470 head-on no matter how cleverly they moved. Ships went dark. Ships vented atmosphere. Ships took hits that they could survive and hits that they could not. And the crews aboard them did what crews do when the ship around them is failing. Some of them died and some of them fought and all of them held. They held not because they were winning. They were not winning. They were losing slowly and deliberately and at extraordinary cost to the craft. And they were losing in a direction, losing in a controlled way, losing while keeping the craft advance pinned to a specific corridor so that it could not spread, so that the wedge stayed a wedge and did not become a flood. 2 hours and 40 minutes into the engagement, a coalition frigate named the Steadfast took a hit that killed its engines and knocked it broadside into the advance lane. It was not a large ship. It should not have mattered. The crew of the Steadfast chose not to be evacuated. They used the ship itself as a weapon, running every remaining system guns, power cells, emergency thrusters on full until the ship tore itself apart, and they tore apart 17 craft vessels with it, and they bought 11 additional minutes. 11 minutes. In 11 minutes, the human ships came through the Venn debris field. They came in low and dark and very, very fast. 12 ships against 470. 12 ships should have been nothing. should have been a footnote. They were not nothing. They hit the craft rear, in a pattern that had no direct equivalent in any tactical database the craft hive mind had compiled, because it was not a pattern in the traditional sense. It was controlled chaos. Each human ship operating independently, finding its own targets, making its own decisions. No central coordination beyond the single shared goal. Do not let them turn and reform. The craft rear turned. The coalition center hit the advance from both sides. The hive processed. Two simultaneous problems from opposite directions. The thing it had never faced before. The thing it had no template for. Its communications began to conflict. Orders went out that contradicted each other. Ships turned one way and then the other, and then back again. Aboard the Adamant, General Kane watched the formation data and said nothing for a long time. Then she said quietly, "There it is." "What?" said Senna. "The scene." Kane said, "Right there." "The hive is stuttering." She picked up the command channel. "All ships," she said, "hit that gap, everything we have, now." They hit the gap. The craft formation broke, not collapsed. The craft did not collapse. They folded, reorganized, fell back 300,000 kilometers in 12 minutes and reformed. And the battle was not over, but the formation was broken and the advance had stopped, and Reach 7 was still standing. For the second time in 11 days, the craft had not taken what they came for. Aboard the Eternal Tide, Veth stood in the war room surrounded by officers who were exhausted and damaged and grieving and something else. The something else was unfamiliar. It took him a moment to identify it. "Dangerous," he thought. "We feel dangerous." He looked at the list of ships they had lost. 40 in the Steadfast was on it. He would write the names of the Steadfast crew himself. Later, alone in the Bahari tradition, the recording of the freely chosen dead. He looked at the list of craft ships destroyed in the engagement. 1 to 12 in one battle, 1 to 12 against 14. The craft had never traded at those numbers, not once in 3 years. His comm signaled Kane. "Commander?" she said. Her voice was the same as always, calm and flat and working. "They'll be back. More ships this time." "I know," he said. "We need to talk about Phase 2. I know that too." A pause, brief. "Your crew on the Steadfast," she said. "They didn't have to do that." "No," Beth said. "They gave us the window." "Yes." He looked at the wall, at nothing. "They have been holding windows open for 3 years. Every crew we have lost has been holding a window for something that was supposed to come through it and never did." He stopped. Something came through this one. Kane was quiet for a moment on the other end. "Something's going to come through all of them," she said. It was not a comfort. She had not meant it as one. She said it like a calculation, like a fact she had arrived at through work. He believed her anyway. Outside, the stars burned. The craft fleet regrouped in the deep dark. The hive was processing, searching for the shape of what had just happened to it. Trying to find the template. There was no template for this. That was the point. The hive had never known fear. It was not designed for it. Fear was, at its core, a mechanism for individuals, a signal sent from one part of a system to the whole saying, "Danger here, change course, protect yourself." Individual creatures needed fear because they were alone. They could be separated from their group, they could be targeted, they could be cut off. The craft hive mind was never alone. It could not be targeted in the way individual things could be targeted. It could not be cut off from itself because it was itself everywhere, spread across thousands of ships and millions of bodies and the vast communication web that connected them all. There was no self to protect. There was only the hive. So the hive processed threats the way all collective systems processed threats, not with fear but with response. Stimulus processing, counter-response. The craft had been doing this for 2,000 years. Every species they had faced had presented new stimuli. The hive had processed everyone. But something had been happening to the hive's processing in the 17 days since the Cassian ambush. The stimuli were not resolving cleanly. The relay station deception had been found. The hive had audited every communication point in its advanced network and found 2 more compromised stations and neutralized them. That was clean. That was solvable. The hive understood that someone had lied to it, found the mechanism of the lie, and removed it. But the battle at Reach 7 did not resolve cleanly. The hive ran the engagement data 14 times, 14 full analysis of the combat record, and every time there was a portion of the record that produced conflicting conclusions. The 12 human ships. The hive had records of human vessels. The humans were new to space, limited in number, technically outmatched by almost every established military power in the region. Their ships were small. Their weapons were standard. Their shields were by any measurement below average. The hive had records of the 12 human ships doing things that the hive's models predict they should not have been able to do. Moving without pattern. Adapting in real time to targets the hive's models said should not have been predictable to them. Hitting weak points in the Karatha rear formation that the hive had not known were weak points until the weapons were already there. The hive ran a query. It searched its historical records for every species it had ever encountered and pulled every record of unexpected behavior that had caused processing errors. The results were sorted by frequency. The humans were not in the results. They had only been in space for 60 years. They had never intersected with the Karatha before this. The hive created a new file. It filed them under a category that had until now had only 3 entries in 2,000 years. The category did not have an exact translation into any language the Bahari Coalition used, but the nearest equivalent was unknown mechanism of action, which was the hive's way of saying, "We don't know why this works, and we don't know how to stop it yet." This was the closest thing the hive mind had ever produced to fear. General Kane read the intelligence report that Senna had compiled from intercepted hive communications, and she read it 3 times. Then she set it down and looked at the ceiling of her quarters for a long moment. "They're confused," Senna said. She was sitting across from Kane with her physical pad, her pen moving in small, steady lines. "The processing errors we created at Reach 7 are still propagating. The hive runs the same analysis and keeps getting the same inconsistent result. It can't file us correctly." "How long before they do?" Kane said. "Unknown. Could be days, could be longer. Their adaptation process is designed for tactics and formations, for things that have rules, even if the rules are new rules." Senna tapped her pen twice on the pad. "What they're struggling with is that we don't seem to have consistent rules. We don't fight the same way twice. Every decision looks different from the outside, because every decision is different," Kane said. "Every situation is different." "Right, but the hive doesn't process it that way. It's looking for the underlying algorithm, the root pattern." Senna paused. "It will find one, eventually. Every system of behavior has a pattern. The pattern is adaptation," Kane said. "And you can't adapt to adaptation. You can study it. You can study it forever. People have been studying us for a long time." Kane sat forward. She picked up the intelligence report again. "The key is that they're confused now, and confused is the window." She looked at Harlan, who was sitting in the corner. He always sat in corners. "Phase 2, how does it look?" Harlan had been quiet for most of the meeting. He was eating something from a container and thinking, and those 2 activities appeared to fully occupy him. "Ready," he said. "Tell me about the craft command node at Grid 7 Alpha." "Triple the defenses they had at the relay station," Harlan said. "Standing patrol instead of automated drones. The node itself is buried inside an asteroid installation, which gives them natural shielding. The access point is a single shaft drilled into the rock." He paused. 2 points. The asteroid rotates on a 22-hour cycle, which creates a 90-minute window where the installation's primary weapon batteries are in shadow. And the standing patrol has a shift rotation every 6 hours, and the rotation creates a 3-minute overlap where both the incoming and outgoing patrols are in transit at the same time. 3-minute window, Kane said. Sena needs less. Sena looked up. A lot less, she confirmed. Kane looked at the map. Grid 7 Alpha was 2 days' travel from their current position. The craft were also currently positioning for what all indicators suggested would be a major push. Their third attempt, larger than either of the first two. The Hive committing forces at a scale that said plainly, "This will not fail." "Timeline," Kane said. "If we go now, we hit Grid 7 Alpha in 42 hours, Harlan said. "Before the craft launch their main push. We put the node to sleep before the Hive can coordinate the attack properly. And if we're not fast enough, then the craft launch the attack before the node is down, and we have to fight the whole thing without the advantage." He set his container down. "We'll be fast enough." He said it the way he said most things, flat and unhurried and with no room left for the conversation to go anywhere else. Veth heard the plan and agreed immediately, which surprised his own officers. "Commander," Rowe said after Kane and Harlan had left, "we are sending 2 people into the heart of the craft advance to disable their primary command coordination while simultaneously preparing to face their largest offensive yet." "Yes," Veth said. 2 people. "That is also correct." Rowe looked at him. Her expression was the expression she had been wearing for 3 years, careful and exhausted and carrying the weight of 460 billion dead behind her eyes. But there was something under it now, something she was deciding whether to let herself feel yet. "You trust them," she said, not a question. "I trust the results," Veth said. 2 ambushes, 2 craft retreats. Those are the only retreats in 3 years. He looked at his chair, at the wood from the dead world. "And I trust that whatever the humans bring to this war, the craft do not have a category for it. Not yet." "The Hive will learn," Rose said. "It always learns." "Then we must move faster than it learns," Veth said. "Which means now." Harlan and Senna crossed into craft-controlled space alone. No support ships, no backup. The insertion craft so dark and cold that it read to everything looking for it as a piece of dead rock drifting between systems. Senna slept during the transit, which Harlan thought was medically impressive. He had seen her do it before, 12 minutes here, 20 minutes there, perfectly calibrated against mission timing, her body obeying her schedule with the loyalty of a well-trained machine. He did not sleep. He watched the sensor readings and ate cold food and thought about the mission in the way he had trained himself to. Think about missions. Not the whole thing, not all at once. Just the next step, always. Just the next step. Step 1, reach the asteroid installation. Step 2, time the rotation. Step 3, enter the window. They reached the asteroid installation in 41 hours. Harlan watched the installation for 6 hours before he moved. He watched the patrol rhythm. He watched the shift rotation. He watched the light catch the rock faces as the asteroid turned and counted the shadow patterns and filed them. Then he touched Senna's shoulder, and she was awake in 3 seconds, fully present, pen already in hand out of habit. 20 minutes, he said. She nodded. The installation was defended exactly as he had said. Triple the stations, standing patrols, weapon batteries in calculated positions on the rock surface. From 100 meters out, it looked impenetrable. Harlan had spent 11 years learning that impenetrable things were full of seams. He found the seam, a service access conduit on the asteroid's inner rotation face, not designed as an entry point, designed as a maintenance crawl space for the installation's water recycling system, which was a detail so ordinary that whoever had designed the installation's defenses had apparently never thought about it. You didn't put guards on water pipes. They went in through the water pipes. Inside the node was vast and loud, in a way that had nothing to do with sound. It pulsed. The hive's communications ran through it in a constant stream of data, signal upon signal upon signal, and Senna could feel the weight of it like pressure against her teeth even before she pulled out her tools. The hive was busy. The hive was coordinating the incoming push. Thousands of ships being moved, supplies being routed, attack vectors being computed in the vast distributed brain that had no center. But this node was one of its major junctions. She did not touch any of it. She did not need to. She needed to be inside it, listening. She needed to find the specific frequency signature of the push coordination, And she needed to plant a delay. Not a lie this time, not a false signal. Something simpler. Static. Very precise. Very targeted static. A jamming routine that would sit dormant inside the node's own communication flow until the attack began. And then it would wake up and introduce exactly 7.4 seconds of lag into every command signal the node sent. 7.4 seconds. It was almost nothing. In human terms, it was a blink and a half. In normal warfare, it mattered very little. In hive warfare, where every ship's movement was coordinated by simultaneous commands where the timing of a formation advance was measured in fractions of a second, 7.4 seconds was the difference between a wall and a gap. She worked for 9 minutes. She planted the routine. She backed out through the water pipes. Harlan was waiting at the extraction point. He looked at her face. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. They left. Behind them, the installation pulsed on, sending its streams of coordination data outward through the hive. The routine sat inside the flow, sleeping patient, waiting for the precise moment it would wake up. It did not look like anything. It did not look like a trap. It was only 7.4 seconds. The craft launched their third push 6 hours after Harlan and Senna returned to the Coalition fleet. 630 ships, the largest single force the craft had committed to this war. Enough ships that the sensor array of the Eternal Tide showed them not as individual signals, but as a mass, a front, a weather system moving toward the Coalition's position. In the war room, no one spoke for a full minute. Then Rose said, "They're confident." "Good," Kane said. She did not look afraid. She looked the way she always looked, working, building, Clear's throat toward something. Behind those steady eyes, the gears were moving. "When they enter attack formation," she said to Beth, "the node at 7 Alpha will fire its coordination signal. The signal will be 7.4 seconds late." 7 seconds, Fell said. He was at the table, arms crossed. He had been a skeptic when the humans arrived. He was not a skeptic anymore. But he was careful. Being careful was how you survived. What does 7 seconds do to 630 ships? Kane looked at him. "The front formation will be 7 seconds out of step with the flanks," she said. "The flanks will be 7 seconds out of step with the reserves. The attack will look like one thing from a distance and be 3 separate things at close range." She paused. "The craft have never misfired before. The hive always coordinates, perfectly. So the fleet will continue to advance even when the timing breaks because every part of the hive will assume the other parts are correct, and they themselves are the error." "They'll attack out of sequence," Beth said slowly. "They'll attack themselves," Kane said. "Not deliberately, not catastrophically, but enough." "Enough for what?" She looked at him. "Enough for your people to do what they've been waiting 3 years to do," she said. "Hit back. Really hit back. Not just hold, not just survive. Hit them and keep hitting them and not stop." Beth looked at the display. 630 ships moving like a tide. He thought about the Steadfast, about the crew that had chosen to stay, about the 11 minutes they had bought with the only thing they had left. He thought about 3 years of holding windows open for something that was supposed to come through. "All ships," he said into the command channel, "prepare for engagement." He straightened in his chair. "This time," he said, "we do not just hold the line, we move through it." The fleet answered. Outside the craft advanced, rolled forward. 630 ships moving with the absolute certainty of a hive that had never lost a major engagement, never been surprised, never found something it could not process and overcome. The certainty was about to develop a crack, small as 7 seconds, wide as everything. The craft advanced arrived in perfect formation. 630 ships arrayed in the wedge that had broken every defensive line for 3 years, moving at coordinated speed. The front edge dense with firepower, the flanks spreading wide to prevent the encirclement tactics the Coalition had last attempted at Reach 7. They had processed the last 2 engagements. They had adapted. The formation showed it. Tighter flanks, a stronger rear guard. The gaps they had shown before now closed. For 30 seconds after the coalition fleet came on sensors, the craft formation looked unstoppable. Then the coordination signal from Grid 7 Alpha reached them. 7.4 seconds late. It was not visible. No ship changed course dramatically. No formation visibly broke. From the outside, nothing appeared to happen at all. But inside the hive, something went wrong. The front edge of the wedge received its attack command on schedule. 700 milliseconds later, the flanks received theirs. But the flanks had been waiting for a simultaneous command, and the delay read to each flank ship as an error in its own receiving systems. Each flank ship double-checked its connection to the hive. The hive confirmed all was operational. The command resent. 4 seconds lost. The front edge advanced. The flanks checked again. 3 more seconds. The front edge was now 7.4 seconds ahead of the flanks it was supposed to be even with, which meant the front edge was exposed on both sides in a gap so small it would not have mattered in any conventional engagement. But the coalition fleet was already moving and the human ships were already targeting it, and the gap was real. A gap that lasted 7.4 seconds. Into the gap, the coalition fleet struck. Veth had been in battles before. He had been in 37 engagements in 3 years of war, and he had felt what battle felt like when you were losing. The sense of ground giving way, of responses coming too slow, of your own force shrinking as the enemy's didn't. The particular weight of a retreat that you were calling orderly, because the alternative word was route. This was not that. This was something he had no prior frame for. The coalition fleet hit the exposed front of the craft, advance with everything. And the human ships hit the flanks from angles the craft's tighter formation had not accounted for, because the angles had not existed in any of the craft's prior engagement data, and the craft front edge stopped for the first time in 3 years. Stopped in space in the middle of an advance. The front edge took the hit and fired back, and the coalition took damage. They always took damage. The craft were enormous and well-armed and not afraid of anything, or had not been until recently, but the front edge did not push through. The hive processed this, sent new orders. The flanks received them 7.4 seconds late. The flanks moved to support the front. By the time they arrived at their commanded positions, the positions were wrong, because the engagement had moved. The hive recalculated, sent new orders 7.4 seconds late again and again, each new command arriving just enough behind events that it was no longer quite addressing the situation it had been sent for. The hive was fighting the battle it had analyzed 7 seconds ago, not the battle that was happening now. It was chasing its own data, perfectly and uselessly precise. It had never chased its own data before. It did not know how to stop. On the Adamant's bridge, Kane watched the tactical feed and said very little. She had done this before. Not with the craft, but she had spent her life finding the seams in things. The points where a system's own design became its vulnerability. And she had seen what happened when a thing that was built to always be right, suddenly, encountered being wrong. The processing cost, the stall, the moment where the system's confidence in itself became the trap. The craft had been certain they were right for 2,000 years. Being wrong was catastrophic to a thing that had never practiced it. "Senna," she said, "how long before they burn through the lag?" Senna's pen was moving in short, rapid strokes. "The routine will degrade. They'll adapt the node around it in." She did the calculation, 40, maybe 50 minutes. 40 minutes, give or take. Kane looked at the battle. The coalition was pressing hard into the exposed front. Harlan's squadron was deep in the craft flanks now, burning with a ferocity that Kane watched and understood, and felt something complicated about. She had built these soldiers. She had trained them, chosen them, trusted them with the missions that no one else was asked to do. And she had brought them here to a war that was not theirs, because she had looked at the data and understood what was coming if no one came. She did not let herself think about the ones who were not coming back. Not now. That was for later, for the quiet after. "Push the reserve squadron," she said. "Everything now. We don't wait for the flanks to finish. We go through the center while it's broken and we don't stop. The reserve squadron received the order. 12 coalition vessels and all 12 human ships straight into the craft center. Through it. The craft center had never been hit from the inside before. The formation was built on the assumption of an external attack. The center was the most defended position from outside, and the least defended from within, because nothing had ever gotten within. The formation had always held its shape, always presented an unbroken front, always prevented any force from penetrating far enough to reach the center. The coalition pressed in from outside, the human ships pressed in from the flanks, and something happened in the craft formation that the Hive's analysis would spend a very long time processing afterward. Individual ships broke formation, not in retreat, not because they were ordered to, because the simultaneous pressures from multiple directions arriving in a fractured timing pattern the Hive's coordination couldn't resolve quickly enough, produced conflicting commands that individual ships had to choose between. The craft did not choose as individuals. They were not built for it. When the Hive's commands conflicted, the ships that received conflicting instructions stalled, held position while the Hive resolved the conflict, which was the safe behavior, the correct behavior, the behavior that had always worked. It did not work now. Stalled ships in a moving formation became obstacles. Ships behind them had to redirect. The redirections fed new positional data back to the Hive, which had to reprocess, sending new orders that arrived 7.4 seconds late into a formation that had already changed shape again. The craft advance, which had moved like a single organism, for 3 years developed gaps, real gaps, open space inside the formation where there had never been open space before. The coalition ships found them, pushed through them. The formation buckled. Board the lead craft command vessel, the coordinator units that served as the Hive's local processing nodes ran continuous analysis of the engagement. They had been running this analysis for 22 minutes now, and the analysis kept producing a result that the coordinator units had no precedent for. The result was, the enemy is behaving contrary to all engagement models. The coordinator unit submitted this result to the Hive. The Hive cross-referenced with its historical database. It pulled every engagement in its 2,000-year record that involved an outnumbered, outmatched force using unexpected tactics. There were many such records. The craft had faced unexpected tactics before, had adapted and won. But the database produced something new when it filtered for the current engagement pattern, rate of adaptation. Most species the craft had faced, even the clever ones, even the ones who had surprised them once or twice, had a pattern. The surprise was a finite thing. They had one trick or two. The Hive learned the trick. The Hive adapted. The species fell. The human ships in the current engagement had used 7 distinct tactical approaches in 22 minutes. Each one different from the last, not variations on a theme. Different engines, different geometry, different conceptual approach, 7 different approaches. Not because they had a list of 7 tricks, but because they were reading the engagement in real time and responding to what they saw, rather than executing a plan. The Hive did not have a word for this. The nearest concept in its database was uncontrolled reaction. But it was not uncontrolled. It was controlled. It was precise. It was just not following any template the Hive could find. The Hive pulled its records on human history. 2,000 years of the craft's records. 60 years of humanity in space. Before that, a planetary history that the craft had collected from outpost intelligence reports and secondary sources. The wars, the near extinctions, the recoveries. The Hive had not prioritized human history before. 60 years in space. They were new. They were small. The Hive read the history now. All of it. In the 17 seconds that the craft's collective processing devoted to this review, with 630 ships engaged in a fracturing battle, the Hive arrived at a conclusion it had never arrived at in 2,000 years of conquest. This species had been doing this to each other for 10,000 years. This was not a new tactic. This was not an adaptation created for this engagement. This was not innovation under pressure. This was what they were. This was how they had always worked. They had spent 10,000 years fighting each other with every possible weapon, every possible strategy, every possible environment. They had run out of opponents who could surprise them because they had been each other's worst opponents for millennia. They had, through the sheer catastrophic repetition of war, become optimized for exactly this: chaos, uncertainty, multi-directional threat, the place where all plans break and only judgment and reflex remain. The Hive had met many warriors. The Hive had never met a species for whom war was home ground. The conclusion filed itself into the new category, the one with only 3 other entries in 2,000 years: unknown mechanism of action. And then the Hive, for the first time in its history, did something it had no entry in its database for. It began to calculate the cost of continuing this engagement. Not the likelihood of winning, not the tactical options. The cost. What it would lose to press forward against something it could not fully model, could not adapt to quickly enough, could not predict. The Hive had never asked that question before. Asking it was its own kind of answer. The craft formation fell back, not a retreat in the way the coalition understood retreats. The craft did not rout. They compressed, reorganized, withdrew to a controlled distance, and reformed. Clean and precise even in withdrawal, but they withdrew. For the first time in 3 years, 630 ships turned away from an objective they had committed to taking. In the war room of the Eternal Tide, no one spoke for a full 10 seconds. Then Commander Fell made a sound that was not a word. Ro sat down very slowly. Veth stood at the viewport and watched the craft fleet compress and pull back. And he felt all 3 years of the war sitting in his chest at once. The weight of it, the dead of it, the wood from a dead world of it, and he did not move for a long time. Kane's voice came through his comm. "They're not done," she said. "They'll be back." "I know," he said, "but they'll come back differently. They'll hesitate. They'll calculate cost before committing. That's new." A pause. "A hive that second-guesses itself is a hive that can lose." "Can we make them do it again?" Beth said. "Every time," she said. "Every time they see us, they have to run a calculation they don't have good data for. And every time they run that calculation, they lose time, and certainty, and coordination." Another pause. "We just have to keep being ourselves." He heard something in her voice, not triumph, something quieter, something that had been paid for. "How many did you lose?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. 3 ships, she said. 17 confirmed crew. More still, unaccounted for. Beth closed his eyes. "They will be recorded," he said. "Our tradition, the freely chosen dead." "Thank you," Kane said. Just that. Nothing more. That night, the night after the battle, the night the craft retreated for the 3rd time in 25 days, Beth walked through the Eternal Tide, and he found Sergeant Harland sitting in the corridor outside the medical bay. Not injured, just sitting. Back against the wall, long legs stretched out, the cup of something dark in his hands, his eyes looking at the middle distance where there was nothing to see. Beth sat down beside him. He did not ask why Harland was sitting in a corridor. He had commanded enough soldiers to know that sometimes you sat in corridors because the rooms were too full of the shape of who wasn't in them anymore. They sat in silence for a while. "Your home world," Beth said eventually. "You nearly lost it twice." Harland looked at him. "Yes." "How do you continue after something like that?" Harland was quiet. He looked at his cup. "You just do," he said. "You clean up what you can, and you rebuild what you can, and you're different after, and you know you're different, and you keep going anyway." He paused. "There's no secret to it. It's just the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing." "Is that what you teach your soldiers?" "I don't teach them anything," Harland said. "They already know it. Everyone knows it. You just have to decide whether to use it or not." Veth thought about this. "The Cathar are afraid of you," he said. I believe that now. I read the intercept Senna pulled from the node before we shut it down. The hive is running new calculations. It has never calculated costs before. Harlan did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had heard something he had expected to hear and did not find it satisfying in the way satisfaction was supposed to feel. Good, he said, flatly. Simple. Does it help? Veth asked. Knowing that, Harlan thought about it for a real moment, not a polite pause, an actual consideration. 17 of my people are gone, he said. It doesn't help with that. No, Veth said. No, it does not. They sat in the corridor together for a while longer. The lights were dim. The ship moved through space. Somewhere in the deep dark, the Cathar fleet was regrouping, recalculating, filing the humans into a category that had no good answers yet. It would not have good answers tomorrow either, or the day after. The coalition began planning their next engagement before the current one was fully recorded. They had the list. The long list that Kane had mentioned that first night when she had walked off her blunt dark shuttle and looked at everything in the docking bay and asked for battle records before she had asked for anything else. The list had many items on it still. The Cathar had 60 years of human behavior in space to study. They did not have the 10,000 years before it. That was the same. That was always going to be the same. 3 months after the Battle of Reach 7, a species called the Delvari sent a message to the Vahari coalition. The Delvari were an old species, 3,000 years in space, powerful, careful, and uncommitted. They had watched the war from a distance and made no move to join it. Their message was brief. It said, "We would like to speak with the human general." After the Delvari came the Shen. After the Shen came the Morthak Collective. After the Morthak Collective came four species in the following 6 weeks, each of them watching what the Karath was doing to the Karath, and each of them sending the same careful diplomatic message. Not, "We want to join the coalition," not, "We are ready to fight." Just, "We would like to speak with the humans." Veth watched the messages come in, and he felt something that was not simple. He felt it because he was glad. He was genuinely, deeply glad in the way you are glad when a tide that has been running against you for 3 years finally slowly begins to turn. Every new species that reached out was another piece of the ground that the Karath had to hold against an expanding threat. Every new ship was a window that could be held open. He felt it because he understood what it meant. These species were not reaching out to the coalition. They were not asking for alliance in the traditional sense, the kind built on treaties and shared interest and the careful balancing of costs and benefits. They were reaching out to the humans specifically because the humans had done something no one in this part of the galaxy had managed in 3 years. They had made the Karath hesitate. They had made the hive calculate cost. They had in 25 days changed the shape of a war that had been a slow and certain death march for 3 years, and everyone watching from the outside had noticed. They wanted to stand next to the people who had managed that. Veth called Kane. She was as usual already at a tactical display. "The Delvari request a meeting," he said. "I know. I've read the message." She did not look up from the display. "They're good fighters, old military tradition. They've held off the Krath on their own border for 400 years. Will you meet with them?" She looked up then. Her dark eyes were steady and working the way they always were, the gears always moving. "We'll meet with everyone," she said. "Every species that wants to talk, and you will tell them the truth," she said. "That the Karath can be beaten, that they have a seam like every other thing, that it takes patience and creativity and a very high tolerance for being in terrible situations." Shi Taowai paused. "And that they have to be willing to keep going when it's bad. That's the part most species haven't figured out." "And you have," Veth said. She was quiet for a moment. The silence of someone considering whether the question deserved a simple answer or a true one. "We've had a lot of practice," she said. Not proud, not boastful. The same way she said most things, as a fact arrived at through experience. The kind of experience that left marks, the kind that did not allow for simple pride. Beth nodded, though she could not see it. He thought about the chair. He thought about the wood from the dead world. He thought about all the dead worlds and all the dead crews and the steadfast, and its 11 minutes and the 3 years of loss that had preceded the 25 days of something different. He thought about what it meant that a species this young, this small, with this much of their own terrible history still raw behind them, had come out here to a war that was not theirs, with 12 ships and a list and a sergeant with a broken and re-healed face who sat in corridors and said, "You just do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing." He thought he understood something now about why the craft were afraid. It was not the tactics. It was not the creativity or the adaptability or the 11 years of practiced infiltration that made a man walk through defended spaces like he was not there. It was simpler than that. The craft were afraid because they had found something they could not calculate the end of, something that had already survived its own extinction twice, that had come out of each catastrophe different and harder and still moving, that did not know how to stop fighting in the way that deep water does not know how to stay still. The Hive had asked for the first time in 2,000 years, "What will this cost us?" The answer was the problem. The answer was, "We don't know, and we don't know when it stops, and we don't know what it becomes next." The craft had consumed 2,000 years of other species' histories. They had just met a species with no bottom. Outside the viewport of the eternal tide, the stars burned. The craft fleet was out there somewhere, reformed and patient and calculating, building a new answer. The coalition was building too, more systems, more allies. The list, working its way down item by item through ideas that had never been tried in this war because this war had never had humans in it before. Somewhere in the corridor outside the medical bay, a sergeant with a broken face drank something dark from a cup and thought about the next step, just the next thing, and the next.